Hujambo Espresso Talk Today community. It's Robin here. I am so glad that you came through to join us today for another uncommon conversation with Professor William Smith from the University of Utah. I promised that we would return to this uncommon conversation, and I keep my promises, community. It has been a few weeks since our previous shows with Professor Smith discussing racial battle fatigue. So let me just say a few, yes, a few words about the previous two shows. I do encourage you, though, to listen to the previous shows if you haven't already heard them, or listen to them again. I've listened to the discussions many times, and I always get something new from them. It's like hearing them again for the first time. Professor Smith brings a wide and expansive, truly expansive range of knowledge and experience to the show, and we are continuing to tap into that knowledge and experience. We have a great resource here, so we're going to get as much information and insight as we can in our short time together. And yes, we are very grateful for this opportunity and for Professor Smith's generosity with his time, expertise, and insight. The first discussion introduced us to racial battle fatigue from the actual man, the actual scholar who coined the actual term racial battle fatigue. Professor Smith explained that racial battle fatigue is a repetitive stress injury that Black people experience from living in an anti-Black environment. He explained the effects of microaggressions on Black mental and physical health, and delved real deep into the history and effects of living Black in an anti-Black environment. Yes, we went there. It was fascinating and eye-opening. But we really focused on racial battle fatigue and its symptoms. And these are important, so let me just repeat some of them really quickly. Tension headaches, trembling and jumpiness, chronic pain, elevated blood pressure, pounding heartbeat, upset stomach, rapid breathing, suppressed immunity, increased sickness, and there can be a lot of other symptoms. Listen to your body. Just think about what happens if you were to continuously injure your ankle or knee. The first time that you injured it, it would heal and it would be okay. The next time you injured your knee, it might take a little longer to heal. The next time after that, the injury might be more extensive, even from a minor accident. You might not heal so well. And the time after that, it might not heal at all. The knee could be permanently damaged. The repetitive stress injury of systemic racism works in the same way. It might affect your heart, causing high blood pressure or even a heart attack. Or it might affect your mental health, causing different degrees of anxiety or depression. Or it might be a different part of your body, causing diabetes, obesity, or another chronic illness. But the repetitive stress injury will cause damage. And this is what Professor Smith discussed in his introduction. By the way, you also don't want to deny the pain and effects of an injury to your knee. So, please don't deny the pain and effects of racism to your body, your mind, and your emotions. The effects are real, and I hope you got that message from Professor Smith's first discussion. I remember he said, and I think this is just brilliant, that the body is a great lie detector. It knows when you're not being true to yourself, and it will respond. So it's best to listen to and heed your body's messages. In the second discussion, Professor Smith discussed Black rage. This is another effect of dealing with the stress of living in an anti-Black environment. Black rage is a fact and a real feeling experienced by many Black people living with the daily indignity of systemic and individual racism. Professor Smith also discussed the role of culture and community in dealing with the stress and rage of racism. Black rage is not a problem. Rather, let me rephrase that. Black rage is not the problem. The real problem is systemic racism, white supremacy, and anti blackness. I believe that black rage can be considered a normal response to living with and experiencing the daily aggressions and indignities of living while black. Who wouldn't be angry about being denied a house or a business loan because a racist bank or the racist banking system doesn't want to invest in you or in your community? Who wouldn't be angry about being denied a job or promotion because the company has a different profile of the person filling that job? Who wouldn't be angry seeing your children suffer and struggle at school because a racist teacher or a racist and biased educational system devalues black children or labels them as unteachable? You might disagree with me, but rage seems like a very normal response for anyone going through what we go through. As the brilliant essayist and novelist James Baldwin said in 1961, way back then, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time. And this hasn't changed, especially watching the devaluation of black lives by the police, the healthcare system, the criminal legal system. I won't say criminal justice, now the term is really criminal legal system, and the anti black environments that we live in. The Black Race discussion with Professor Smith was short, but it was intense. We have more from Professor Smith today. We'll begin to discuss coping strategies. We've spent these last shows, introducing the problem that Black people face, but now it's time to discuss ways to cope with systemic and individual racism. Of course, besides dismantling white supremacy, that's the big job. It's a necessary job, but we need solutions now, today, that we can use to mitigate the effects of racism. So this is where we will start today. Ben and Diane will arrive in just a minute, and then we'll get started. While we wait for them, let me just remind you a bit about Professor William Smith. Professor William A. Smith is a full professor and department chair in the Department of Education, Culture, and Society at the University of Utah. He also holds a joint appointment in the Ethnic Studies Program, African American Studies Division, as a full professor. Dr. Smith is the co-editor of the book, The Racial Crisis in American Higher Education from 2002, and his research primarily focuses on racial battle fatigue. His work has appeared in many prestigious journals, and now he's appearing again with the Espresso Talk Today team, and we are very grateful. Ben and Diane have now arrived. By the way, before we get started, I just want to say that we will discuss many issues and events that are or can be stressful or traumatic. This can be very difficult. If you start to feel stress or symptoms of anxiety or depression or other symptoms, then take a break. Take time to breathe. Please don't feel weak. It is nothing about that. It takes strength to take care of yourself. We'll be right here when you return. Let's turn today to today's Uncommon Conversation with Professor William Smith about coping with racism. Already in progress.
A strategic attack and perpetuation of this genocide on blacks. So much so that everything that we consume is poisonous. And what I mean by that, what we see on TV, what we see on music videos, what we see displayed on commercials. When you just look at the black people in movies, when you look at the black actors or people through an African-centered lens, a lens of genocide and a lens of racial battle fatigue, you start to understand why are we having the problems we're having in our society, because people are imposing things on us where we're thinking that they're giving us a healthy option to do things and to be expressive.
Interesting. But I actually want to go kind of completely off topic from that into universities.
Interesting.
You were discussing about critical race theory and how it isn't taught in universities. But how about we look at place the institution of the university under the microscope and say, what about Black students in primarily white universities? What are some coping strategies for them, or what should they do?
Well, black students in historically white colleges and universities have to realize that they basically part of an underground railroad,
Hmm.
right? And they have to know where the safe houses are.
Hmm.
That's why they attack the safe houses when they find out where they are, like the Black Cultural Center here, and it's only in its fifth year of existence. But the safe house does not have to be a house, a building. A safe house could be a community.
Yeah.
So black people have to realize that we're always part of an underground railroad, um, particularly when we're surrounded by whiteness.
Hmm.
And if you don't connect to that, if you don't find that space, then you put yourself at risk, at jeopardy, um, from a psychological level, from a physiological level, and to be forced out of the institution. So you have to be involved with the Black Student Union. You have to be involved with um, the student organization of Black social workers or Black engineers or the Association of Black Psychologists. Find out what the Black parent organization to your field is and their student organization. Get involved so you have a network. The more that we are networked together, the better we are able to persist. And we have to go back to Du Bois and remember that you have to be kind of basically bicultural in the U.S.
Hmm.
You have to understand, and which we do. We're really the people who can explain whiteness and white society better than any other group, um, and how to navigate it. But then you have to be tied down to your Africanity. You have to be grounded. And the data suggests there was a paper written by Philip Bowman and Cleopatra, Cleopatra Howard on three generations of blacks and what were some of it was from the National Study of Black Americans. And what they found was those black young people, if they had grandparents, parents, uncles, aunts, sisters, brothers who could tell them what it meant to be black, and then what it meant to be black in America and how to persist, they were much more successful in college than those black people who were taught to just be human.
Hmm.
Oh.
Interest. That
Mm.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that colorblind notion doesn't work for black
No,
people.
absolutely not. But I'm curious. I'm still curious because yeah, I'm at a university. I grew up in Europe. I really identify as European, and our university doesn't seem to have a Black student union or any collection of Black people in that same way. At least not that I know of, and not one that's English speaking that I know of. What advice would you have for someone in my situation then?
Well, it's much more easy for you today than it was for me. You
Hmm.
know, especially those people that part of baby boomer generation. And I don't know if black people are really part of the. I got to look at that data again to see if we had a boom like white people had a boom. But anyway, I'm supposed to be part of the baby boomer generation, and that's before we had computers in our homes.
Yeah.
I could talk to you across seas on
Yeah.
Zoom. You
Yeah.
you got a smartphone, and I mean that I was watching that on the Jetsons. you
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Me too.
and
Hmm.
now it's exists today. So you have YouTube. You can listen to Dr. John Henrik Clark break this down. Dr. Yosef Ben Yakadin, um, Dr. Claude Steele, Dr. Marimba Ani, um, Dr. Francis Quest Welsing. You can listen to all of these things on YouTube, and you can have what Dr. John Henrik Clark talked about back in the day, are those book clubs in Harlem
Mm.
where black people would come together and digest a book and break it down. So you can start that kind of mental development, cultural development by bringing students together from all over the world, all
Yeah.
over Europe or wherever, just on the internet.
Hmm.
And you can find peace and prosperity and wholesomeness and collective identity and self worth from those interactions. And you'll look forward to it. Same thing like with that's what the black fraternities and sororities offered us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because we can bring culture together and purpose and work within a cloak of secrecy to a certain degree to get things done. Now, some of them aren't doing what as much as what their founders intended them to do,
Hmm.
but we can be always be better. So I suggest your world is not as limited as it could have been 60 years ago, or it was 60 years ago, because you can reach out and touch anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also like to add, Professor Smith, it just for Ben's knowledge as well as others, there's a number of, as you mentioned, groups on social media. For example, there's a number of Facebook groups around the fraternities and sororities where you can join in, into the dialogue or the conversations, or see when they're having special events or broadcasting certain types of activities or speakers or things of that nature, as well as there's an HBCU group on Facebook, and again, it doesn't require that you have attended a HBCU or, be a member. So in that regard, uh, you know, those are also some avenues as well as resources. In addition to, for example, you had talked about other affinity groups with, like if you're a engineering student, the Black Student Engineering Group, they're online, they have their own group. So there's a number of different, as you mentioned, groups through social media as well as other, platforms where people can interact now, virtually.
Yeah.
And
No, thanks for that. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, so I think that I think that's one of the most important things nowadays, the most powerful things, is to be able to use this Zoom platform or whatever platform um, to have conversations, to develop plans, to be serious. And we can't wear, we can't have thin skin, because
Hmm.
the way to get liberated for Black people is gonna hurt, right? You're gonna have to hear some truths. You're gonna have some accountability. Say, you know what? I have been thinking about this wrong. I have been going about this in a problematic way. Most people start to get sensitive when they're held accountable, and you have to be held accountable for your actions, because each action has a consequence, and it's either a consequence for a liberation. Now that's my mother's radio. I don't know.
wow,
They must be
we
listening
cover
to
each
this.
one.
Yeah, that's my father. But they must be having a family dialogue or something. Um, so every decision has a consequence, and then we have to hold ourselves. And that's what culture provides for us. Remember, identity, purpose, and direction,
Yeah.
right? And also, to a certain degree, discipline. If you act outside of the culture, if you act outside of the culture, um, you can get put in a precarious position. Big Mama start saying, "Hey, sit down. Let me talk to you for a second." You
Uh-oh.
know,
Mm-hmm.
and and we need to get back to respecting our elders, but we have to come from disorder to order.
Mhm.
And many of us have been in a disorderly position for so long, and we grew up in disorder. We think that's order,
Yeah.
and that's the
So,
part that's gonna hurt.
so you had mentioned with regards to bringing us back to some type of order. Would you consider that as similar to like coping strategies to help us deal with the issues of battle fatigue, racial battle fatigue, and for that matter, bringing us back into ourselves so that we can be more healthy, take on more healthier types of ways in which to deal with these type of issues?
Yeah, the order I'm talking about is a psychological order, a behavioral order, an organic order, um, spiritual order, and I'm not talking about religion, but spiritual order, divine order. What is divine order of femininity? Divine order of
Yeah.
masculinity.
Yeah.
Um, we have to understand that order and not care what other people think, right? So the fact is, why is it that you have to ask those questions again? Why is it that everybody's trying to tear the black man and woman apart?
Yeah. Good question.
Why do they promote that stuff? Why are they infusing things to get us not to come together? And we act like we're not smart enough to figure this out. Right? You ain't doing that to no other group. You're not promoting that in any way. And then they put blackface out to get their agenda that they want to do. So they'll put somebody who's really out there doing something that's considered wild to get society to accept that because it's a black person. And then they come up and they don't go as far, but it moves their agenda along. But we become the black face out there. And so when we're so out there, the movement that they get, it seems like it's justifiable, right? Because you got that kind of rabbit running around the greyhound track, and the greyhounds are just following it,
Hmm.
right? And so I think our purpose is to have that divine order, and that's with our health. I mean, think about this. We got people that don't even cook today, black people. And then like some have, with this, it's well, I got a degree and you still gotta eat,
Yeah.
Yeah,
right? And
right.
it used to be, you see, that's the roles that about culture. I just watched some videos on food in Africa, and many of the women who cook these foods understand, well, these ingredients helps to reduce high blood pressure. This, when I put this in this helps to eliminate diabetes.
Yes.
So we had these women who knew how to do something, who were basically the community doctor, right?
Yeah.
And they put it in the food that was part of a culture that passed itself down. But in the U.S. text, that's something that I'm gonna cook. I'm too big to cook, right? Because we're thinking Eurocentrically. All three of my boys know how to cook. My daughter doesn't really know how to cook. she refuses. She's the baby, but she, it could be that last child syndrome or whatever. But um, the fact is, my boys all have a mastery in cooking, and so they can feed themselves, and they know the ingredients to put in certain type of foods to keep them healthy.
Yeah.
And we've got, all of those old school traditions, the so-called wise tales, right? Big Mama used to tell, well, you probably all grew up in that castor oil generation.
Oh yeah.
You
Yeah. Oh
know,
yeah. We'll get to
hated that stuff,
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But but now we don't do the things that was part of our culture that kept us healthy. I bet if Big Mama was still alive, my Big Mama was born in 1899,
Whoa.
and my great grandmother, and I'm named after her. My middle name's after her husband, and I even lived with her for a while. But she would make things and say, "This is what helps you to be strong," or "This helps you to make sure you don't get colds," and all these other things.
Yeah.
That's lost.
Yeah. Yeah, I have my
Well,
big mama's book. Yeah, well, she was a juicer. Yeah, she liked to juice a lot. So she really believed in celery juice and all these different vegetable juices she would make. And yeah, I think she was born in 1890. Yeah, I still have
Oh,
that book too. Yeah, it's over there on the piano. I should show it to you, Ben. Yeah.
wow. I didn't.
Mhm. Yep. I'm sorry. One question back, kind of going into some of the coping stuff. You mentioned last time the 4 R's, and I was going through the transcript and I thought, okay, maybe I could get a little bit more an explanation on that, and maybe we can walk one through a situation, which we all have. Any of us can bring up a situation, maybe walk through it to see how we can handle things without letting the cortisol go crazy, or the glucose go off this to the ceiling and all of that. So
Yeah,
yeah, if you could just mention the 4 R's first, and then maybe we can look at some real life, sadly, situations.
right. Well, the 4 R's are for trauma informed care to apply to racial battle fatigue,
Trauma informed. All right.
right? And so we have to realize that racial battle fatigue is part of a trauma explanation. And realize, I mean, this is, and can I just pause for a second?
Sure.
One of the reasons why I love black people so much, and I love African culture is, I mean, we the first people. uh, Even the white genealogist Dr. Leakey said, he let that leak out, but we know we are, and so there's something deep and spiritual and wonderful about us, and it's part of that is in everybody because we're the mothers and fathers of civilization. Everybody comes from the black woman, right? So no matter what you call yourself, part of your legacy comes out of Africa. It might be so far removed that you do something else and you have a different culture, but the pure culture of Africa is so beneficial to us to get back in order because once we're in order, we'll be able to solve what is considered mysteries of today. If we can build pyramids, not aliens, we build pyramids and we build dynasties and we have a balance of order. And you can see that through every ancient Egyptian
Yes.
tomb. You
Yeah.
see mother, father, and child, not father, mother, child, or make her a ghost or something like that. You see a balance. And even with the Greeks and other folks who say, well, those are hieroglyphics. No, hiero meant sacred. Glyphics meant carving, sacred carvings.
Ah,
These things on the walls, and if you go to the tomb of Imhotep, you will see who was the master doctor, master educator, and all these things. And the oath that doctors take basically comes from him, right? To do no
Oh,
harm. And when you look at that, you see a birthing chair. Women used to squat to give birth, and it was much better. So if that's what I personally believe the major fear is. I don't talk about it too much because people think you're crazy, but black people have such a spiritual power and intellectual power that once we're able to tap that, beauty comes out of it. Love and balance and order, reciprocity comes out of it. And so that's why we have to continue to be made ignorant. And so part of that's the trauma. So we stay in a trauma state. If we come out of this trauma state, then we can overturn the world and it'll be a much better place for everybody.
everybody. Yep.
So trauma informed care first is to realize you have to realize the systemic and individual nature of racism. You have to look at how it causes racial battle fatigue and seek resilient, adaptive coping strategies. So you have to realize, that means you have to open your eyes and realize, oh, wow, this is what I'm living in. And remember, I said for some of us, trauma is our normal.
what
It's
Mm.
is our
something,
normal? Sorry.
trauma is our normal.
Trauma.
And then
Yes.
for others, trauma is our dysfunction, right? And so we don't realize that we are in a state of disorder because of the trauma that causes dysfunction,
Mm.
right? And the next thing is, so that's just to realize what your condition is. Then you have to recognize the signs and symptoms of racial battle fatigue in ourself, in our family members, and other group members. So
Yeah. Yeah.
realize and then recognize. Two
So
different ways of approaching that. Then the third thing is you have to respond by fully committing to strength based, asset based coping strategies that are based in healthy racial identity development. All the research suggests that if one has a healthy racial identity development, stress goes down, depression goes down, all of these other things go down, and now you can start to think clearly.
Yes.
And if we
And
start to tweak this thing, my daughter will start to learn that she is the goddess of uh, nurturing, and she will say, you know what? Because she likes to bake,
mhm.
and but she'll say, what? I'll start to create these dishes that have been part of our cultural history to promote health, because she's very health conscious. And we get back to the way we used to do things, then we'll see that there's a balance. And so we can have our own gardens. We can pick organic stuff from our gardens and cook that.
yeah.
You were
Oh.
going to say something, Ben?
Yes, I was. Uh,
Ooh.
I'd never heard that term before, but I think it's so useful. Healthy racial identity development. Uh, like if just talking from my experience, if I had heard that, throughout my high school and middle school experience, rather than, color doesn't exist, I can't imagine the difference it would have made. But then how do you define, like, what would be some measures of ensuring healthy racial identity development?
Yeah.
What does that look
Well,
like?
there's great work by Dr. Howard Stevenson,
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Phil Bowman, Dr. William Cross has written on this. But basically, what it is, and even Dr. Naeem Akbar,
Mm. Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
have to have defensive mechanisms that protect your identity to remain healthy. So some of those things could be from having adaptive coping strategies, proactive coping strategies, defensive coping strategies, spiritual coping strategies um, that are passed down from generation to generation and across um, generations, right? And that's the reason why it's um, so important for us as Black people to continue to have reunions or to get
Mhm.
reunions going again, so you can hear those messages, because oftentimes the ones who are doing so much and been given so many opportunities, education, go to college and then have these nice jobs, are taken away from the Black community.
Yeah.
And if you take the so-called best and brightest away, then I used to call it the rose box theory. So if we have a garden filled with roses, beautiful, and we keep plucking those roses out without planting new seeds, what will be left?
Yeah.
Dirt, weeds, everything else. And then we'll blame the weeds for the garden.
Oh,
Mhm.
not the roses who left.
Right. And the person who planted, because they
Mm.
forsake the dirt, the rich dirt that produced Africa, the rich dirt. The black or the green on that flag
Yep.
represents Africa,
Yeah.
right? So that's part of it. And then the other R, if I didn't mention it, was resist. So you have to resist individual, institutional, and systemic efforts at racial re-traumatization. And that gets back to your question, Ben. That's where you have the protective, the proactive, and the adaptive coping strategies.
Okay. Hmm. Um, so, I mean, are these more on the systemic level, or can, I mean, individual use this in an individual situation? Can you walk us through?
Yeah,
When,
no, it's at the individual, familial, community level. So you can have this throughout, and we should have it throughout, right? It's no different than what the Jews have done in New York. I mean, think about that for a second. That here you have a group of people who go through a Holocaust, and America has nothing, well, indirectly, they indirectly have a lot to do with the Jewish Holocaust. The scientists on genetics and all this other stuff taught their scientists, right? But here in the U.S., we have to learn about the Holocaust. If you go to New York City, you see Jewish vendors, store owners, schools, banks,
yeah.
all these type of things, right? And and they even celebrate Hanukkah, and the kids are all right with it in a primarily Christian nation.
Mhm.
And we balk about Kwanzaa,
Yeah.
right? So my point is, we have to reproduce something that looks like us and that's healthy for us. We have to employ people. We have to set up schools. We have to set up community centers. We have to do the things that continues to produce order, and we don't have that. So, and you look in the black community, you'll see that it's people come in from other communities, take the resources and wealth of that community out, and return it back to their communities. And they don't sponsor anything like the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Little League, the arts, and all these other things. They sponsor it in their communities, right? So they become predatory.
Oh,
They're no different than a mosquito that comes in, it stings you, but it takes your blood to nourish something else, right? So I think that's how we have to look at it. And if we have models out there, we know that we've tried. We've had Black Wall Street in Tulsa. We've had Greenwood in Florida. We had Bronzeville in Chicago. We had Harlem, well, through periods of the history, Harlem in New York, right?
yeah.
Parts of Philadelphia. So we've had places, Chocolate City, D.C., but we don't have the infrastructure. And part of that is because white supremacy would not allow it. But we have to remind ourselves that resist is the final R. And that's resist re-traumatization. That means we have to own our own stuff. And we have to be unapologetically black. Right? Unapologetically black.
This is where we will stop for today. But this uncommon conversation is far from over, very far from over. In fact, I don't think I ever want it to end. But of course, it does have to. And this is where we'll stop for today. That was a very helpful conversation. And we're just getting started, but there is so much to unpack already. I hope that we all remember this important point. Professor Smith really emphasized this. We need a healthy racial identity. This may take defensive coping skills, adaptive coping skills, and even proactive coping skills. But having and sustaining a healthy racial identity is one of the most powerful ways to fight the effects of systemic and individual racism, to fight the effects, the stress and trauma of racism. Many thanks, Asante Sana, to Professor William Smith for presenting these powerful and frankly often overlooked coping strategies. As Professor Smith said, racial battle fatigue is a repetitive stress injury. It's a stress response to living in a racist environment, and it can lead to illness and premature death. It's so important to remember that it is an injury. Microaggressions are real, and your feelings about them are valid. Macro level aggressions are real, and your feelings about them matter too. Professor Smith said in a previous show about microaggressions, they are a way to keep people in their place. That's what racial microaggressions do. They keep people in their place and keep them out of other places where they are not welcome. I mean, that is kind of the definition of living in an anti Black environment. And yes, it is real. Professor Smith also emphasized that racism is a violent attack against the Black body. And I just have to repeat that. Racism is a violent attack against the Black body. It's not an annoyance. It is a violent act. But there is hope, lots of it, and he really laid it out for us today. Remember, having a community where you can be yourself, express yourself, and feel comfortable in that space is an important coping strategy. Remember the 4 R's of trauma informed care. The 4 R's. First, realize the systemic and individual nature of racism. Realize the systemic and individual nature of racism. Second, recognize the signs and symptoms of racial battle fatigue. Third, respond by committing to a strength-based coping strategy that is based on health and racial identity development. Fourth, resist individual and institutional efforts at re-traumatization. Let me say that one again, because that one is so important. Because even after going through all of this, there are efforts to re-traumatize you. And you have to, number 4, resist individual and institutional efforts at re-traumatization. Realize, recognize, respond, resist. And remember, always remember, having a strong racial identity, a strong purpose, and a clear direction will support and sustain you against racial stress and trauma. It's one of the most powerful coping strategies. Remember, unapologetically Black. You can find more of this information in more detail on our Instagram page at Espresso Talk Today. So this ends today's discussion of coping strategies. Obviously, we're going to keep discussing ways to cope. Until systemic and individual racism are gone, we as Black people need to have and use effective coping strategies to build and protect our mental and physical health and well-being. We need to build a strong racial identity against all the efforts and attacks that try to destroy or undermine it. Next week, Diane, Ben, and I, and of course Professor Smith, will discuss specific incidents of racist behavior with Professor Smith. Yes, these are real incidents, and they are painful to recall. They are. They might be painful for you to hear. So please remember to practice self-care and to use your coping strategies. And remember to breathe. I won't get ahead of the discussion. Let's save some for next week. At Espresso Talk Today, we are a vibrant community of amiable intellectuals who are passionate about issues affecting Black people. Community and health are very important to us. And that's why we're so happy that Professor William Smith joined us today to discuss the concept of racial battle fatigue and coping with living in an anti-Black environment. We hope that you learned a lot today. I know I did. And we hope that you'll return to hear more of the discussion as we present specific and actual incidents of racism with Professor Smith. Remember to send your thoughts and comments to us at team@espressotalktoday.com. Thanks again, Espresso Talk Today community, for coming through. A big Asante Sana to Ben and Diane for participating on this show. And remember, now more than ever, soul, strength, and reparations. Asante Sana. Bye for now.